Okay, today we're talking about function notation. So the first thing I'm going to have the kids do is read this. So I'm going to pause it for a minute. Let you read about Leonard Euler. Okay, so there's a little bit something about I. Remember we talked about it yesterday when you do a square root. If we have a square root of 25, it's just 5. But if we have the square root of negative 25, we should say that's really the square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1. That way it separates it out. And this part right here is I. And that part right there is 5. So the answer would be 5I. Technically means 5 times I. There's a whole, like we could do a whole week worth of stuff on imaginary numbers and just scratch the surface. But the basics that you'd need to know, if you ever see I, you should know, oh, they mean the square root of negative 1. This is actually a test question in the ACT. They test and see if you know about I. And they might not just say, what is I? They'll probably do something more complicated. They might say, what is 5I squared? And then you'd have to go, okay, I squared means I times I, right? And that means 5 times I times I. Would you agree with that so far? And what is I equal to? Square root of negative 1. So that's really 5 times the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1. Then, if I take the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, that's equal to negative 1. And that makes the answer negative 5. So I have an easy way for you to get an ACT point. If you can just remember this one little thing, that I squared is negative 1. It's negative 1. As simple as that. I is the square root of negative 1, but I squared, then, is negative 1. So if I said, what is 5I squared minus 3, you should go, oh, that just means 5 times negative 1 minus 3. I showed you a long, complicated way to figure that out, but if you can just memorize that I squared is negative 1, and that I is the square root of negative 1, you got yourself an easy ACT point. Okay, see if you caught that. What is 7I squared minus I squared? Don't say it. Figure it out in your head. You can do it without paper. Can you answer that's a negative number? That's a good sign. What do you think it is? Negative 6 is right, because 7 times negative 1 minus negative 1 means really negative 7 plus 1, negative 6. Okay, there you go. That's a typical ACT question. I squared is negative 1. And it comes from the fact that I is the square root of negative 1. Okay, let's move on to more stuff you need to know. You remember the vertical line test? That just means like this is an example of a function that's passing the vertical line test here. This one is passing because the vertical blue line right there only touches once as you drag it throughout the entire function. If I have a vertical line here and I go through this function, it'll touch twice. And therefore, one input has 2 outputs, and that's not okay for a function. So a function typically is written with f of x like this. So y equals x plus 5 is the exact same thing as f of x equals x plus 5. Do you get how they're the same thing if you just say that y and f of x are the same thing? All right. Then if x equals 2, I can stick in a 2 right here and right here. And then that means that f of 2 is 2 plus 5, and 2 plus 5 makes 7. You're just sticking in a 2. So if I have this function, f of x equals 2x plus 5 over x minus 3, and they told me that they wanted f of 8, aren't they just telling you to stick in an 8? Yeah, that's all they're asking. Everybody do that right now. Figure out the answer, billboard it to me. Keep it turned so that I know you're in good shape. And I'm still waiting for somebody else. The first person is done. Second person is done. Keep it turned. Still waiting. 3 people. I am not Mr. Boswell. 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th person, 10th person. What's wrong?
It's like,
oh yeah, I know that charger makes the glitch.
look at that.
Oh, weird. Huh, okay.
Yeah,
I'll get you a different charger. Here.
Yeah, it's just.
Here, use the portable one. This thing will work just fine. That goes in the iPad. That goes into, there's two, that one. Okay, so here we go. You stick in an 8 right there and right there. I'm going to put it in parentheses, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But then I'm going to go 2 times 8 is 16, plus 5 is 21 over 5. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Okay, a few people made just dumb adding, subtracting mistakes, but no big deal. Okay, next. Let's go to this one where it's sticking in -7. Here's where it's getting more important that you put an empty parenthesis in for x. Picture back when you first learned x. They said in elementary school, let's pick something where we don't know what the number is. And I think the very first thing they probably said was something like this. Question mark plus 5 is equal to 7. And then question mark must be what? 2. And then they started saying, you know, when you get into algebra, we start calling it x. And you could pay it x, you could call it y. I really wish at that moment they would have started using this, an empty parenthesis. Because that's what you should be using. Anytime you see an x, you should say empty parentheses. Let me show you what I mean. You should rewrite this thing as 2 empty parentheses plus 5 over empty parentheses minus 3. And it's like a skeleton that's ready for you to pop in the right number. There we go. Stick in the -7, and now you'll get the right answer. And why does the parentheses even matter? Again, if I have this, here's a situation where if you don't do the parentheses, you'll get it wrong. If this x is equal to -8, and I go, I don't need parentheses, -8 squared. And if you actually do that right, then from here, you've screwed it up. Because now you'll have to do 8 squared is 16, and the answer will be -16, and it's not supposed to be -16. What you were supposed to have done is put in the parentheses, like this. And then you're supposed to drop in the -8, and now you're supposed to do -8 times -8 makes +16. You'll get 2 different answers, and only one of them's right. Sorry, 64. 64, sorry. Dang. Okay. You're missing the whole point if you're not getting that the parentheses are really, really important. Okay, so if you have functions like this one, for instance, wherever you have the x, you should be thinking to yourself, empty parentheses, like that. And then they're going to tell me something to drop in. All right, and if they told you that they wanted f of 3, you drop in a 3. And then you can figure it out from there. Okay, this one gets a little more complicated. F of x is 21. Wait a minute, they didn't tell me an x this time. If they didn't tell me x, let me give you a clue. They just told you y. Because f of x is the same thing as y, right? So we don't put the 21 in for the x. They're not telling you that. They're telling you that f of x, which is like the y, is 21. And then from there you can just solve it, subtracting 9, dividing by 4. Do you get what I'm saying? All right. If you really get what I'm saying, this next part might blow your mind still. F of g of 2. All right, whenever you have a hard math problem, I know I've mentioned this before, you start on the inside. You work your way out for from the inside out, kind of like a little bird pecking its way out of the shell, okay? Another example I like to give is if you've ever watched the movie Alien. It's sort of like the alien getting inside the human and then laying its eggs, and then they come out from the inside out. Anyway, it's a really good movie. Very scary. Give you nightmares. Okay, anyway, we start on the inside and work our way out. I'm going to start with g of 2. If I had just said, what's g of 2, you would have been, that's child's play. I could stick in 2, and 2 squared will be 4. 4 plus 5 is 9. Do you get how that's 9? Then g of 2 is really 9, so I just go like this. I replace the g of 2 with a 9, and now all I really want is f of 9. You know what I'm saying? F of 9, then, take the 9, stick it in. 9 times 4 is 36. 36 plus 9 is 45. So the final answer is 45. All right. So let's do this again, except instead of f of g of 2, I want you to figure out what, we're not doing this part yet, we'll get to that in a minute. What's f of g of negative 1? What's f of g of negative 1? Figure it out. I'm fine with you doing these in your head because they're easy enough. Start with g of negative 1, do it in your head. If you've got a repeating number, like 22 or 66, then you probably did it right. Okay, did you start with g of negative 1? If you started with g of negative 1, you stuck in a negative 1 in the g function. Notice we have two different functions, f of x, g of x. And if I have negative 1 squared, that's 1. 1 plus 5 is 6. Do you get that this is 6? Raise your hand if you knew that. Okay, good. Now it's f of 6. We go back up here and say f of 6 is a 6. F of 6 would be a 6. 6 times 4 is 24. 24 plus 9 is 33. A double number like I was describing. Raise your hand if you had that one right. That's most of you. Okay, good. Now is a medium hard question. One of those kind where they're not telling you x. They're telling you y. But in this case, they're saying g of x is 14. Would you use your iPad, write that equation out correctly with g of x being 14, and then solve it? Try it. All I ask you to do is write out g of x. Instead of g of x, put a 14. So, put a 14 right there. But you might think the answer is super simple from here, but do it and see if you get an answer that makes sense to you. Okay. Turn it my way and tell me what you think. Okay. All right. I'm separating out my top students because they're thinking of something other people aren't. So other people are not. All right. So here's how you do it. You subtract 5. You subtract 5. You draw the line 9 equals x squared. And then you go, oh, square root of 9 is 3. X equals 3. That's not quite right. Haven't I done this a few times? Isn't this on some important top 20 sheet to keep you from forgetting that? What's the answer to that again? Oh, there's two answers. What is it? Plus n minus 3. Both answers work. Really what's happening here is you're taking the square root and then the absolute value of x comes out to 3. Square root of 9 is 3. I'm going to put it over here. And then from there, there's two answers. X equals 3, x equals negative 3. And I know some of you are still not getting, why are you doing this absolute value thing? Can't you just say it's plus and minus 3? No, you can't. You don't want to know why? Because when you have something like this, and I take the square root of both sides, square root, the square root of 4 is 2. It's not plus and minus 2, it's just 2. And the square root of this part, when you take the square root of a variable, you need the absolute value. And that makes a different one on the top 20 sheet. You got to know how to solve that little puppy. Remember how it breaks into two answers? X plus 3 is 2, and x plus 3 is negative 2. So often people don't get that you got to split it into two separate equations. You just can't slap a plus and a minus 2 on it. You have two separate equations, and then you'll have two separate answers. X equals, subtract 3, negative 1. And over here, x equals negative 5. So there's two answers, negative 1, negative 5. Why? Because we had a squared in our problem. That means that there's supposed to be two answers. All right, so I'm going to see if you really understood what I was trying to tell you there. Solve that one. Is it charging? Yeah, now it's not charging super fast. Somebody ripped off my cord for my better charger. Okay, you go square root, square root. Absolute value of x plus 1 equals 4. That breaks down into two problems. X plus 1 is 4. X plus 1 is negative 4. Subtract 1. X equals 3. Subtract 1. X equals negative 5. So you got 3 and negative 5. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Way more than half of the class, at least. Okay. Why would you ever have that? Because there are a lot of function problems like this. And in a minute, I'll show you another one that you'll need to have that little skill for. All right. G of A. Wait a minute. Isn't that where x is supposed to be? Isn't it supposed to be g of x? Well, what they've done is they replaced the x with an a. So they're asking you, just as if they had said, what's g of 8? You would be supposed to be putting in an 8. Well, you're supposed to be putting in an a into the g function. So I'm not using this function, I'm using this function. And I'm supposed to put in what? A. So I'm going to put an a right there. And g of a will be a squared plus 5. And that's it. You can't do any more unless you know what a is. This brings up the point that you could put in anything into a function. And we do this in pre-calc. We will have a function like this, and we'll say, I want you to figure out what f of negative x is. So that means instead of wherever you see the x, you're supposed to put in, this is a f function, so I'm not going to use the g one this time, I'm going to use the f. So f of negative x, I'll put a negative x right there. 4 empty spot plus 9. Remember that part about put an empty spot for the variable? Now I'm going to drop in negative x. Negative x. 4 times negative x, negative 4x plus 9. And there's your answer. That's a typical pre-calc question. Figure out f of negative x. All right, anyway, you can figure out f of banana if you want to, or f of carrot, or f of Bob. I'm going to do g of Cindy. Okay, what I want then is I'm going to find the g function. I'm going to pop a Cindy in right there. So I'm going to have Cindy squared, I'm going to put her in parentheses, plus 5. There's your answer. Getting the point? All right. Yes, sir. The square root of Cindy? I don't know. This is where the thing starts to break down. We don't need to solve it, though. We just have the answer, and this is it. Cindy squared plus 5 is your answer. Done. Don't have to solve it. All right. Next kind is where they want you to do a plus 1. So that's like, we're done with this part here. G of a plus 1. Well, it's the g function, so I'm using this function, so I'm going to write it out. Empty spot squared plus 5. You're getting a theme here? I constantly do that, and you'll need to do that in pre-calc too. So empty spot squared plus 5. Now I'm going to drop in that into the empty spot, a plus 1. Then a simple-minded person would say, oh, that a squared plus 1 squared plus 5. They'll just take this squared and this squared. I keep on pounding on this in your top 20 sheet that you can't take something squared like that and just square both of them. It does not work. You have to go a plus 1 and a plus 1 plus 5. And then you multiply it all out, and it would take a while, but all right, last question. This is the hardest of them all. F of m minus 2 equals 21. It's this one right here. All right, I'm going to slide back up and write that out again for you. I'm going to see if I can clean this up just a little bit. And maybe if I go like this, just delete out this part, the other part will come up so we can see it. Awesome, there we go. Find m. I'll leave a little space in there. Find m when f of m minus 2 equals 21. Okay, did they tell me an x or did they tell me a y? They told me the y is 21. Did they tell me what to put in for x? Yes, they did. They told me to put that in for x, and they told me to put that in for y. So which function am I using, the f or the g? Looks like the f. So I don't need this function at all. I'm just going to use the f function right here, and I'm going to have, wherever I have the y, which is right here, I'm going to put in 21. 21 equals. And what should go in for the x? M minus 2. That's where x stuff goes. You get that? I'm going to give you another one. See if you can handle this one. If f of x is equal to 3x minus 7, then what if f of r minus 2 was equal to 20? Go ahead. Give it a try. It's all about substituting stuff in. You take your equation, you say, okay, the f of x, that's like y. And they told me that y was 20. And instead of the x, I got to put in r minus 2. I'm going to pause for a second while you give that one a shot. Here's what you should have done. You should have put in f of x is like y. You put in the 20 there. 3 and then empty spot where the x is. I hope I pounded that into your head enough. And now we put the r minus 2 in there. Get that? Now I just got to solve for r. So I'm going to go 20 equals 3r minus 6 minus 7. So that's 20 equals 3r minus 13. Then I'm going to add 13 to both sides. 33 equals 3r. And then divide by 3. R equals 11. Raise your hand if you got the same thing as I did. Awesome. Okay. Your homework for today is to take problems that's like the hardest of them. Most of them are much easier than that. It's 4.2 day 1. Your assignment is to do all of them. Now we have about a half an hour left, and here's what I want to do with that. There's about 30 of you. I want to spend about 1 minute with each of you on the problem that you're having the most trouble with on that top 20. If there's one that like you just haven't gotten right yet, or one that you've gotten wrong 3/4 of the time, okay? I want to talk over that problem with you. I guess that's all I got for the video for today.